Hey there, Cryptid family. If you enjoy the chills, don't forget to like this video, subscribe if you're new, and hit that notification bell if you're not afraid of the whispers. The hiring process was too easy. I should have known something was off when they called me in for an interview just 2 hours after I submitted my application online. I'd barely skimmed the job description. Nightshift janitor at Walmart Distribution Center, number 3847, before clicking apply. No experience required, full benefits, and pay that was significantly higher than I expected. Desperation makes you ignore red flags. By the time I arrived for my first shift, the distribution center was a looming industrial beast in the dark. Towering walls of gray metal, lined with floodlights that flickered just enough to make the place feel uneasy. Trucks lined the back, some idling with drivers inside, others abandoned like someone had left in a hurry. At the front entrance, a glass vestibule led to the AP desk, asset protection. The guy behind it was built like a fridge, buzz cut, and had the dead inside stare of someone who had worked security way too long. His name badge read Carver. He barely looked at me as I approached, just held out a scanner. Badge. I fumbled, digging out the laminated ID card they'd mailed me the day after my rushed online orientation. It had my name, a grainy photo of my face, and DC 3847 janitorial in bold. The second Carver scanned it, the glass door buzzed open. Break rooms down the hall. Shift starts at 10. Don't wander. He didn't elaborate. The inside of the distribution center was massive, an endless sprawl of conveyor belts, loading docks, and steel shelves stacked to the rafters. The kind of place where a person could disappear and no one would notice. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting an unnatural white glow over everything, but shadows pooled in the high ceilings where the light didn't reach. The break room was smaller than I expected. A few folding tables and vending machines against beige walls. A single bulletin board was covered in safety warnings and printed out emails from management. Right in the center, a laminated list of rules was pinned like some kind of official policy. I thought it was a joke at first. Night shift janitorial guidelines. If you see a forklift moving on its own, do not acknowledge it. If a pallet is stacked perfectly, do not clean near it. If you hear whistling from the rafters, clock out immediately. If a second janitor shows up, leave immediately. There is no second janitor. Do not approach any doors that are not marked with an official sign. If you see an unmarked door open, do not look inside. Stay out of the aisles between 2:13 a.m. and 2:16 a.m. If you are in an aisle during this time, do not move. Do not breathe. If the power goes out, sit in the break room until it returns. No matter what you hear, do not open the door. If someone in a yellow safety vest asks for help, ignore them. They do not work here. A slow chill crept up my arms as I read through the list again. Some of the rules felt like pranks, but others Others had a weight to them, like they weren't just written to be funny. They were warnings. I glanced over my shoulder. The break room was empty. The time on the wall clock read 9:58 p.m. Sighing, I shoved my phone into my pocket and grabbed my cleaning cart. The whole thing rattled as I wheeled it into the corridor, passing by rows of massive shelves stocked with pallets. The air smelled of cardboard, metal, and something else, something stale, like old dust that had settled too deep into the cracks of the concrete. The first hour was quiet. I moved through the picking area, sweeping up stray plastic wrap and discarded labels. Occasionally, I'd hear the distant beep of a scanner or the low rumble of a truck backing into a dock. Nothing unusual. Then, at exactly 11:23 p.m., I heard it. A forklift engine. The sound was distant at first, humming from somewhere deeper in the center. I paused, gripping my mop handle. There was no one else on shift tonight. At least, no one I had seen. The sound grew closer, the soft whir of wheels, the hydraulic hiss of a lift engaging. Slowly, I turned my head toward the main aisle. A forklift rolled into view. No driver. It moved with an unnatural precision, gliding into place beside a stack of pallets. The forks lowered, adjusted slightly, then raised again, like it was doing a job, like it was aware of what it was supposed to be doing. The laminated rules flashed through my mind. 1. If you see a forklift moving on its own, do not acknowledge it. My grip tightened on the mop. Every instinct screamed at me to back away, to get the hell out of there, but I forced myself to act natural. I turned my back, focused on scrubbing a particularly stubborn mark on the floor. I counted the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. The engine idled. The hydraulic hiss returned. 4, 5, 6. The wheels turned. The forklift backed up, disappearing into the aisles like it had never been there. Silence. I exhaled slowly, heart hammering against my ribs. The floor beneath my feet felt colder. I reached for my radio, then stopped. A sound drifted from the high rafters above me, a whistle, a long, slow tune. And it was getting closer. I barely slept after the first shift. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that damn whistling. A slow, tuneless sound drifting from the rafters, growing closer. But the worst part? No one else had been there. I told myself it was my imagination, that it was just the stress of starting a new job, that maybe the forklifts were running on some kind of automated system, and the rules were just some twisted workplace initiation. I told myself a lot of things, but I still showed up the next night, badge clipped to my shirt, pushing through the front doors of DC 3847 right at 9:55 p.m. Carver, the asset protection guy, was exactly where I left him, He barely looked up from his security monitor as I slid my badge under the scanner. Beep! The glass door buzzed open. You made it past your first shift, he muttered. I frowned. Yeah, no response, no follow-up, just silence. I pushed through to the break room. Everything looked the same. Rows of folding chairs, vending machines humming softly, the dull glow of the overhead fluorescents. But as I stepped inside, something felt different. And then I saw it. The list of rules had changed. If you see a forklift moving on its own, do not acknowledge it. If a pallet is stacked perfectly, do not clean near it. If you hear whistling from the rafters, clock out immediately. If a second janitor shows up, leave immediately. There is no second janitor. Do not approach any doors that are not marked with an official sign. If you see an unmarked door open, do not look inside. Stay out of the aisles between 2:13 a.m. and 2:16 a.m. If you are in an aisle during this time, do not move. Do not breathe. If the power goes out, sit in the break room until it returns. No matter what you hear, do not open the door. If someone in a yellow safety vest asks for help, ignore them. They do not work here. Do not look at the security cameras tonight. My stomach twisted. That last rule, it hadn't been there yesterday. I swallowed hard and grabbed my cleaning cart. I wasn't going to stand around waiting for something to happen. If I worked fast, maybe I could get through the night without running into whatever the hell was going on here. I was mopping near receiving when I saw it. A perfectly stacked pallet, shrink-wrapped so tightly that it looked impossibly smooth. There was no way human hands had done this. It wasn't just neat, it was precise. I took a step back. Rule 2. If a pallet is stacked perfectly, do not clean near it. My pulse pounded in my ears. My mop left a wet streak on the concrete as I slowly backed away. Nothing happened. I swallowed and turned down another aisle, moving fast. The pallet didn't follow. But when I turned the corner, there it was. The exact same pallet. The wrap was identical. The labels were identical. Every box was in the exact same position. The air felt heavier. I gripped the mop handle tighter, my fingers slick with sweat. I hadn't heard a forklift. I hadn't heard anything. But the pallet was here now, as if the warehouse itself had moved it. I turned and walked away, refusing to look back. By the time I reached the maintenance corridor, my nerves were raw. I'd managed to avoid anything else weird for the past couple of hours, but the new rule wouldn't leave my mind. Do not look at the security cameras tonight. That meant something would be on them, and I was dying to know what. As I passed a locked utility door, I heard it, whistling. My entire body went rigid. It wasn't distant this time. It was close, coming from above. My head lifted just slightly, enough to see the shadowed beams of the rafters where the light didn't quite reach. My throat went dry. Something was sitting up there. It was perched on the beams, its long legs dangling. The shape was wrong, too thin, too elongated, and it was whistling. I took a slow step back, forcing my body to move, my muscles locked up, every instinct screaming at me to run. But I couldn't. I knew better. I couldn't make a sound. The thing in the rafters stopped whistling. The silence was worse. I gritted my teeth and kept walking, fighting the urge to break into a sprint. By the time I reached the break room, I was shaking. I slammed my cart against the wall, breathing hard, my ears straining for any sound. Nothing. The whistler was gone. I turned toward the security monitor, and my heart nearly stopped. The cameras were on. The screens flickered softly, displaying multiple angles of the warehouse. I swallowed. Do not look at the security cameras tonight. I knew I should turn away. I should sit down, pretend I hadn't seen them, let the rule protect me. But my eyes drifted to the largest screen, and I saw myself. I was standing in aisle 14, holding my mop, except I wasn't in aisle 14. I was in the break room. I watched, frozen, as the other me lifted their head and stared directly into the camera. I shouldn't have looked at the cameras. That thought repeated over and over as I sat in my car outside the distribution center, gripping the wheel like I could somehow steer myself away from what was about to happen. My stomach twisted, bile creeping up my throat as I replayed the moment. I saw my own double in aisle 14, how it had lifted its head and stared directly into the camera, like it had known I was watching. I should have quit, but I didn't. At exactly 9:55 p.m., I forced myself out of the car and into the building. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like dying insects, flickering at odd intervals. Carver barely acknowledged me as I scanned my badge. His expression was different tonight, though, tighter, more strained. "You look like hell," he muttered. I ignored him and pushed into the break room. The list of rules was still there, exactly as I left it, but something was different. The edges of the paper were curling, not like paper aging, like it had been burned. I swallowed hard and scanned the rules again. No new additions, but that didn't make me feel any better. I grabbed my cart, checked my watch. 10:03 p.m. Time to get to work. It started small, a dark shape at the far end of a loading dock, a flicker of movement near a row of stacked pallets, things I could explain away if I tried hard enough. Then I reached the maintenance hallway. The overhead lights flickered, once, twice, then held steady, and that's when I saw it. A figure standing at the end of the corridor. It was tall, unnaturally tall. The head nearly brushed the ceiling, its limbs stretched like something that had been pulled too far, too thin. I stopped mid-step, my breath hitched in my throat. The thing didn't move. Its silhouette was pure black, like it wasn't just standing in the dim light. It was absorbing it, a hole in reality, carved out in the shape of a man. I blinked. It was gone. The hallway was empty. My hands trembled against the mop handle, a cold sweat trickling down my spine. I forced my feet forward, quick but steady. I wasn't running, not yet. I was mopping near receiving when I heard footsteps, steady, unhurried. I turned, expecting to see Carver, maybe someone from day shift, finishing paperwork. But it was me. I froze. At the far end of the aisle, another janitor stood watching me. Same uniform, same height, same face. Its head tilted slightly, unnaturally, like it was studying me. Do not acknowledge the second janitor. There is no second janitor. I turned away. The footsteps continued. They were getting closer. I gripped the mop tighter, my heart slamming against my ribs. I forced myself to keep working. Footsteps, closer, too close. A cold breath tickled the back of my neck. Then, in my voice, a perfect, empty echo. You're in the wrong spot. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. My fingers dug into the mop handle until they went numb. A long silence stretched between us. Then, finally, the footsteps retreated. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore before I turned. The aisle was empty. I wasn't alone. I knew I wasn't alone. I had 1 minute. Stay out of the aisles between 2:13 a.m. and 2:16 a.m. If you are in an aisle during this time, do not move. Do not breathe. I pushed the cart toward the break room, checking my watch. 2:12 a.m. 1 minute, 50 seconds. I passed through the picking area, keeping my eyes straight ahead. The air felt thick, like walking through water. The lights above me flickered. 40 seconds. 30. Then the power went out. Darkness swallowed the distribution center. I froze. The only sound was my own heartbeat. The air felt colder now, heavy with something I couldn't see. Then came the sound, a low, dragging noise. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. The walls, the ceiling, it was everywhere. Something was moving in the dark. The dragging turned into scraping. Something was crawling. A metallic whisper filled the silence, a voice thin and dry, like rust flaking off old machinery. Found you. The sound came from directly in front of me. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The darkness shifted. The air turned thick with the scent of something rotting. And then the power snapped back on. The lights buzzed to life. I was alone, but the mop in my hands was dripping with black sludge. It wasn't water. It wasn't dirt. and I wasn't sure it had come from the floor. I should have quit. After last night, after the figure in the hallway, the doppelganger, the blackout, I should have walked away. But I didn't, because when I woke up the next afternoon, there was an email waiting for me. From management, no reply at Walmart, DC, 3847.com. Subject: Incident report. Body: Your performance has been noted. Your employment has been adjusted. Effective immediately. Pay increase $35 per hour. Do not discuss your shift with anyone. A raise, a massive one, but I hadn't reported anything. They knew, and they wanted me to stay. Carver was waiting for me at the front. For the first time since I started, he actually looked at me. "You're still here," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, like he was confirming something to himself. I swiped my badge under the scanner. The glass door buzzed open, but I didn't step through immediately. "Carver," I said. My voice felt small. "Did you ever work night shift?" His jaw tensed. He looked away, then went back to watching the monitors. I took the hint and walked in. The break room was exactly the same. Vending machines humming, flickering, fluorescence. The list of rules was still pinned to the board, but the edges were even more burned now. I scanned them, heart pounding. The same 8 rules. Then my stomach dropped. A 9th rule had appeared. If you see a forklift moving on its own, do not acknowledge it. If a pallet is stacked perfectly, do not clean near it. If you hear whistling from the rafters, clock out immediately. If a second janitor shows up, leave immediately. There is no second janitor. Do not approach any doors that are not marked with an official sign. If you see an unmarked door open, do not look inside. Stay out of the aisles between 2:13 a.m. and 2:16 a.m. If you are in an aisle during this time, do not move. Do not breathe. If the power goes out, sit in the break room until it returns. No matter what you hear, do not open the door. If someone in a yellow safety vest asks for help, ignore them. They do not work here. If the door in maintenance is ajar, do not look inside. If it is fully open, run. I stared at the last rule, my breath catching in my throat. The maintenance hallway, where I'd seen the shadow. I grabbed my cart, but my hands were trembling. I forced myself to move, forced my feet to follow the same routine. Mop, wipe, sweep, keep moving. But at 10:42, I passed the maintenance hallway, and the door was slightly open. The metal door at the end of the hallway had always been locked. There was no label on it, no sign. It wasn't on any of the maps. But now it was open, just an inch, a sliver of pure black. The overhead lights buzzed louder, flickering wildly. My breath felt heavy. I wasn't going to look. I wasn't. But then the door creaked. It opened just a little more. I stepped back, every muscle locking up. The air coming from inside was wrong, stale, like a tomb. Then, movement. Something inside shifted. The shadowy blackness took shape. A hand, a long, clawed hand. No, not a hand, a limb, twisted, jointed wrong, bent at an unnatural angle. The thing reached forward. It was coming out. I ran. I tore down the hallway, shoving my cart out of the way. The lights around me dimmed, flickered, then snapped off completely. The power went out. I nearly skidded to a stop. Rule 7. If the power goes out, sit in the break room until it returns. No matter what you hear, do not open the door. I was still in the hallway. A sound filled the dark. Not footsteps, not breathing, a scraping sound, something moving, crawling, getting closer. My hand shook as I pulled the break room door open and slammed it shut behind me. Silence, darkness. Then the knocking began, slow, deliberate. Right outside the door, knock, knock, knock. My fingers dug into the chair I had collapsed into. The knocking stopped. A voice whispered through the crack beneath the door. It was my voice. You forgot to clock out. The knocking didn't stop. I sat frozen in the pitch-black break room, gripping the sides of my chair, every muscle locked tight. Knock, knock, knock. A perfect rhythm. Not urgent, not aggressive, just waiting. Then my own voice whispered through the door again. You forgot to clock out. The hairs on my arms rose. The thing outside wasn't me. I forced my breathing to slow, to steady. The power would come back. It always did. Rule 7 said to wait. A minute passed, then another, then scray. The sound of something long and sharp dragging across the door frame. I clenched my jaw so hard, my teeth ached. Another scrape, then another. A horrible, deliberate sound of nails. No, claws, testing the door. I glanced at my watch. 2:14 a.m. My chest tightened. The rule, 2:13 to 2:16 a.m. If you are in an aisle, do not move, do not breathe. I wasn't in an aisle, but I was sure as hell not alone. 2:15 a.m. The doorknob twisted. I stopped breathing. A slow creak filled the room as the door inched open. Not fully, just a sliver. Just enough. And in that sliver of space, I saw it. A hand, thin, too long, jointed in the wrong places. Gray skin stretched too tight over bone, claws scraping against the metal door, and beyond that, in the darkness of the hallway, eyes, black, sunken pits that should have been empty, but they weren't. They saw me. The thing leaned in, and it smiled. A mouth too wide, too many teeth, too many rows of teeth. I shut my eyes. 2:16 a.m. A clicking sound echoed from the hall, a reversing forklift alarm. And just like that, the door slammed shut. The lights flickered back on. The room was empty. The thing was gone, but I wasn't safe yet. I needed to leave. Now, I shoved my chair back and grabbed my radio, my hands slick with sweat. I didn't care about finishing my shift. I didn't care about the rules anymore. I was getting out. But when I stepped into the hallway, everything was wrong. The lights were too dim, the shadows too thick. The entire warehouse looked off. The aisles were narrower, the racks taller. The doors that I had walked through 100 times before were suddenly different sizes, too wide, too thin, too short, like the building was rearranging itself. I hurried toward receiving. My badge buzzed against my chest as I ran, heart hammering. Then, movement. I skidded to a stop. At the end of the aisle, a figure stood waiting. Not just any figure, my doppelganger. It lifted its head, and this time, it didn't just tilt its head in curiosity. It grinned. I backed away. Slowly, it moved forward. Its limbs twitched, the joints snapping as it walked toward me. I turned and ran. I bolted through the maze of aisles, my lungs burning. My radio crackled at my hip, but it wasn't my voice coming through. Where are you going? You forgot to clock out. Come back. The voices overlapped, shifting in pitch, in tone. Some were mine, some weren't. Then I saw it. The front entrance. Carver was still at his desk, staring at his monitors, completely unaware of the nightmare unfolding behind him. I didn't slow down. I sprinted toward the AP desk, lungs on fire, shoving past racks of inventory. Then a shadow moved to block my path. A massive, towering thing. It unfolded from the darkness like a puppet, with its strings yanked too tight. Too many arms, too many writhing limbs. A mouth that was both too wide and not wide enough, its shape shifting with every breath. I skidded to a stop. Carver finally looked up. His face paled. Run. I didn't need to be told twice. I swerved, diving for the exit. The creature lunged, claws raking across the floor where I had been standing a second before. I slammed my badge onto the scanner. The glass door buzzed open. I barreled through. The second I hit the parking lot, my lungs nearly collapsed. Cold air stung my face. My legs burned. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. The warehouse loomed behind me, silent, watching. My hands fumbled with the keys. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, locked it. Then I looked up. carver stood at the entrance. His face was completely blank. I stared at him. He stared back. Then slowly, he raised his hand and waved. I didn't go back. The next morning, I blocked the warehouse number, deleted my emails, shut my blinds. They never called, never followed up. I checked the news. Nothing, no reports, no missing persons, just silence, like I had never worked there at all. But sometimes, late at night, I swear, I hear whistling right outside my window.